and a little bit of lessons learned during that process. One thing that I would share is that as we watch the end of the season, the end of the summer, we always talk about, back to school and things like that. And when you see the commercials and they say, however you go back, it really has added meaning today because everybody's doing it absolutely different. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, and we see a lot of folks doing a lot of creative things, and some things are a little bit less creative. But we kind of break it down to a couple of basic categories. And I guess for the purposes of my 4 or 5 minutes here, just looking at things in terms of what's essential, what's required by the law, and what's required by the CDC, what's required by the county. And I won't get into that because unfortunately that's changing, and every county is different and every municipality is different. And quite frankly, a lot of school boards are doing things differently as well. So essential is going to be different depending on where you might be. Guidance is really just best practices. So how do we respond to some of those essential requirements? And we'll talk about those in just a bit. And then of course, future considerations with emerging technologies and research, and that might be a good topic if we have some time at the end. But I thought I'd focus on, basically just some of the short-term approaches. What are schools doing today as they go back? And some schools are completely virtual. In some cases, you might have teachers in the classroom. Sometimes you might have teachers at home, like you guys are today, or sometimes they're even outsourcing it to third parties, which is a completely different animal completely. Some dual schools are going 100% full-time, and they're getting people back into the classroom with minimal social distancing and following the recommended requirements by their local county health department. And the vast majority of them are doing some kind of a hybrid. It might be everybody's virtual on Mondays, and then Tuesdays, Thursdays, Wednesdays, Fridays. You might have some different level or number of students in the classroom. So I guess the key is that there's no right or wrong answer. There's just a lot of different answers out there. And as we talk to these districts and we learn from them, we've learned a lot of different things. The first one, of course, is social distancing. How do we keep people away from each other? And especially with education, especially with the little guys, social is really a big function of what education is all about. You need that sense of community and that sense of being together with your classmates and your teachers. And this whole COVID experience has kind of thrown that on its ear. And in terms of social distancing, we look at things like something as simple as getting inside a classroom. Traditionally you walk in the front door, a teacher greets you, you're happy to go. Well, that's kind of been turned on its head because now we look at, coming in a door and going out a door. You really don't want to be doing that. So we see larger rooms that might have one door dedicated for ingress, one door dedicated for egress. Oftentimes we even see front doors to schools, which, a lot of schools have been looking at security and security entry vestibules for years, which has been fantastic, but that's been kind of turned on its ear as well because many of those doors are now one way. So in the morning, everybody comes in one door. If you have to leave, you have to go out a secondary door, and they reverse it at the end of the day, which really makes it really challenging. We also see a lot of mapping on the floor, basically giving students wayfinding. How do they get from point A to point B? Again, these are kids that have been, for the most part, they weren't with their friends the end of last year. They've been kind of on their own most of the summer, and you give them an opportunity to be social again, and that's what they want to do. So this wayfinding, when they're walking up and down the corridors, inside the classrooms and the cafeterias, is really an opportunity to kind of give them a little sense of added guidance in terms of where they need to be to help maintain some of that social distancing. We've also seen a lot of reorganizations inside the classroom. It might be as simple as just turning the desks in the same direction. With little kids, of course, you have learning communities, and you might have special stations and things like that. When the kids get older, you might have requirements for specific curricular requirements. But we're seeing a lot of folks that are now taking those student desks and pointing them all in the same direction. Well, for one, that helps maximize social distancing. They're all pointing in the same direction, and in theory, they're all speaking in the same direction. So you're not kind of getting those particles on each other, but you're also maximizing the occupancy inside those classrooms. And some communities are working with the 3-foot standard. Some are working with a 6-foot standard. Some have others. So these are all opportunities to increase the density and get more kids in the classroom. We also look at things like teacher's desk, which you might not think about it, except, traditionally you walk in the front door, you've to the classroom, you've got your teacher wall, you've got your teacher right there. This is a new environment because, if the teacher, for instance, is the one who stays in the classroom all day and the students come back and forth, a lot of classrooms and a lot of teachers and districts are taking that teacher's desk and flipping it and putting it in the back of the room. The reason they're doing that is so that when the kids are coming and going and passing, they're not passing the teacher. So what you're doing is you're minimizing your social interactions so that the teacher's in the back of the room and the students who are leaving with more frequency are in the front. Conversely, if the students might be staying, you might flip it the other way so that the students stay in the back if they're in the classroom more often, and the teacher might come and go. Again, it could be very different for different teachers and different grade levels, even within the same school structure. And of course, there's obviously things like touchless strategies, whether it be for automatic flush valves for toilets and urinals. We might look at things for automatic on and off for water faucets. Those have always been a big component of energy conservation and savings, but they've taken a really added meaning over the summer. Almost everyone, without exception, has really taken hold of this trend and actually taken it to the next step. Even some things like, how can you open a door without using your hands? Sometimes we see foot pedals. Sometimes we've seen some wrist latches. There's a number of different strategies out there to help dirty little fingers from touching things throughout the school. We also look at things like visible signage. We talked about what's on the floor, but also how do we reinforce? Wear your mask, wear your face guard, maintain social distancing. It's become a huge graphic element in and of itself. It's always been strategies about developing school spirit, but now that's taken a new turn in terms of how do you develop that camaraderie, that sense of community, but also sending out this message in terms of being safe during this COVID. Some other things we see are storage. We all know that classrooms are always short of storage. I've never designed a school in my entire life that had enough. And every teacher, that's their first complaint. But many districts now are actually taking that to the extreme and taking storage out of the building, out of the classroom, I should say. So things like curricular, it might be books, it might be materials, it might be storage items, could be paper, could be anything. Those items are coming out of the classrooms in many cases. For one, it's easier to clean the classroom when they're not there, sanitize it, but also it provides valuable square footage. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start running the math, if you can get an extra 2-3 students by minimizing and eliminating some of the wardrobes or desks or storage along the perimeter, that really provides a really good opportunity to get more kids in the classroom. And of course, looking at things like larger spaces, cafeterias, gymnasiums, multi-purpose rooms, any space that has a large volume is really a great opportunity, and districts are taking advantage of using those as multifunction classrooms. You might take a gym, for instance, and turn it into 6 learning academic classrooms. You might have a cafeteria and do something similar. We're seeing a lot of crossover. We're seeing a lot of taking existing spaces and really reimagining them, and an opportunity to provide that kind of density so that you can get the students in there. And finally, things like outdoor environments. Outdoor environments have always been critical to student health and enrichment, but they've taken an added importance now because, quite frankly, if there's a parking lot, if there's a playground, if there's a piece of grass or a football field, we're seeing school districts throughout everywhere really utilizing those spaces and being creative about how they're doing it. It could be nothing more than putting out a chair for the teacher and letting the kids sit on the ground, or some more formalized structures. We even seen some temporary built structures that really provide that kind of outdoor environment for the kids, which is always great, but also provides that social distancing, which is really important. So those are just a couple of, kind of short-term approaches to guidance and best practices I thought I'd share with the group, and hopefully kind of get some of your feedback and see if any questions might arise.
Steve, I guess you have to take your cues from the district, the school that's engaging your services. I mean, you might be seeing certain high standards on, say, CDC or various other services with their recommendations, but the attitude of the community and the school, I guess, is what you really have to work around.
It's an excellent question because we're challenged with it all the time. And to be candid with you, if you're in Wisconsin or Illinois and you've got a very powerful state board of education, a lot of those things come state down. The state of Missouri, Missouri Board of Education really has a bottom-up approach. So to answer your question, it all comes through the local school board and all decisions are made at that local level. Many times they take their cues from the county, but they are not obligated to. And that's really where we see so many differences in terms of approach and process in terms of this. And it really makes it challenging because you can be in one district that does one thing, you can go across the street to another district and maybe doing it very, very differently.
Well, and in some ways, I mean, my children have been out of school for a long time. My grandchildren, I have one who's finished. However, I've had children in both rural Missouri schools. I grew up in a very highly competitive environment on the East Coast. I've had children in Overland Park schools, which were very different from Stone County rural Missouri schools. And my big observation is the parents determine the environment. They determine the goals that they have for their children, and that impacts the school board. It impacts who runs for the school board. It impacts who sets policy. So in some ways, it's good. We like local. But in other ways, then it makes it a little more difficult for your job to incorporate maybe what you would think of as from a health point of view in your work, even down to like ventilation, et cetera, to provide the top standard that you might want to see professionally.
Mm-hmm. No, it's an excellent point. And I like the way you phrased it because everything does start with the parents. And if you see the news, there have been some local school districts, Rockwood, for instance, there was, first of all, especially with the St. Louis County, Collier counties, there's been a lot of vocal opinions raised by the community, both for and against masks or no masks, whether go to school or not to school. And that information does weigh heavily on the school board. And ultimately, the school board does provide direction to the administration who executes that and, quite frankly, hires architects like me and things. But at the end of the day, those school board members are all elected by the community, and they have to reflect the standards and values of those communities as well. So it's a challenging job, and I always tell them that they got the toughest job that they're never going to get paid anything for, which is really what school boards are all about. And it's tough. It really is it's a challenging process.
Well, are you asked from time to time, what do you recommend for the distancing of these desks or for the physical? I mean, all you can do is the physical and the the flow paths for traffic, your recommendations there, your review of ventilation, et cetera. And that is a question I have. How much are the schools asking you about ventilation?
Well, we all know the ventilation costs money, and it's really cheap to put a couple of package air units up on the roof and replace the roof handling system every 20 years. And most superintendents are retired by then, so they don't care. That conversation has changed over the last couple of months. Specifically, we've seen a lot of districts looking at very small areas in the schools. A lot of nursing stations, for instance. We've seen many schools that are repurposing classrooms or doing something different. If they're spending emergency dollars, they're spending it to upgrade the ventilation and increase the square footages of their nursing areas and their ability to take care of their students and provide something that I never heard of before, which is a quarantine room. So we see a lot of those in our schools nowadays where if a teacher or a student should become ill, they take them out of general population, you can put them into a quarantine space, and then they can be, their parent or whatever can come and pick them up. So those are things that we're seeing immediately. And from a ventilation standpoint, many districts are actually looking toward healthcare guidelines in terms of what those mechanical requirements are going to be. You know, traditionally with schools, you know, some of these buildings are older, some of the windows open, sometimes they don't. It's hard to manage humidity. It's hard to manage temperature in many cases. We're seeing a lot of folks who are looking toward really providing a lot more restraints in terms of what that mechanical system design, really getting humidity in the building between 40 and 60%. We're looking at changing the air filtration, even if it's only in a small portion of the building, like a nursing area or something, where you can put in a MERV 13 plus filter. We've had people talk about even adding HEPA filtration in some of those locations. It's really an interesting conversation, and in the short term, those are the things that we're seeing, but long term, we're actually seeing a little bit more in terms of, quite frankly, it's the whole well building process where we're looking at you know, indoor air qualities and how can we manage everything from, you know, ventilation, filtration, and things like antimicrobial, and even how can we kill viruses through our mechanical systems. And that's really a whole nother set of conversations that, you know, districts have never entertained, but now they are having some serious conversations about it, and I'm kind of excited to see how that discussion goes.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Carl, but you're our one school district representative here. I wonder if you have anything you want to share or insight or questions.
No, I mean, really, obviously, just over since the spring, we've been looking at every facet of our buildings and how we will need to modify and change things. And obviously, we have a lot of work underway. There are some things that are just incredibly expensive to overcome. Obviously, ventilation is one of those bigger challenges because, you know, your existing systems are not designed to accept a filter change, you know, of such as a MERV 13, because it will have a negative impact on the functionality of the system and actually shorten its lifespan and cause some operational challenges. So that's obviously the hardest thing to address. We have been going through the process of just putting a lot of touchless plumbing type fixtures into place. So we had most of these things in our schools. It was just really making sure that we were comprehensive and putting them everywhere. So, you know, perhaps while we had most of our student restrooms had all the automatic flush valves and touchless faucets, we didn't have it in our staff restrooms. So we've been doing that conversion. We've established isolation rooms at each of our schools as well, just to have a designated location, you know, in preparation for that situation, should we have one. So, and then we've obviously put all kinds of additional signage and decals and so forth in place, you know, so upon return of our students, we will give them the proper reminders and direction.
So I'm kind of curious to know, well, there's been a lot of discussion about toilets and like the automatic valves, and one of the things that I just recently sort of heard about more is that when they're recommending that people, when they flush the toilet, that there is a lid over that toilet, because that helps prevent the spread, because it doesn't create that aerosol from the, you know, from whatever fluid was in there. So in my experience, in more public areas and restrooms, there is no lid. There is no lid over any of that. So has there even been any discussions about creating lids over those?
I tell you, I probably, Carl, this would be a good question for you, but you can install the lids. The question is, how long would the lids stay there? Schools are tough environments, and we have to think about things a little bit differently. You're absolutely right, Brandon. You know, providing toilet lids that are going to remain in place for a high school that's got 1,500 kids in it, that is a real challenge.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly aware of any heavier grade types of toilet seats that exist, because obviously the types of toilets that we have in schools and types of seats that they are outfitted with are obviously a heavier grade than your traditional residential toilet seats. So I have not seen any that are of the higher grade or quality that have lids at this point. And I haven't actually heard of anything, but it does not mean it, that it's not on the market somewhere. I just haven't encountered it as of yet. I'd say one of the biggest, I'm sorry. One of the biggest challenges we've had is actually in the process, and I've had this conversation with my counterparts at other districts. While everybody is willing and able to make all the necessary modifications, within their budgetary limitations, the biggest challenge we've had is actually getting the materials. There's such a high demand for flush valves, touchless faucets, hand sanitizer dispensers, soap dispensers. All of those items have become in such high demand that we're having challenges getting the products. So for instance, I had to wait about 2 months to get flush valves when I could normally get them in a couple weeks, under normal circumstances. So that has been one of the biggest challenges, and it has a lot of the facility guys on edge as they're trying to outfit their buildings with all these, different mechanisms, and they're unable to do it just because of the supply chain has been our biggest challenge. So I'll yield the floor here.
I just had a couple comments or questions for you, Steve. Thanks for this information. I'm with Negwar Materials, and we're involved with supplying materials. And Carl, we understand the supply chain issue. We've come across that trying to get materials for you all. But my question, getting back to the classrooms, do you see, you had mentioned even having outdoor classrooms. I'm an outdoor person. I do well in outdoor environments. Do you see that being an option? I mean, in the future, like actually, do schools consider that? Obviously, it's going to determine where they're at climate-wise, but is this a viable option for some schools?
I think so. We actually had one client in Jefferson County who we were doing some additions, and we basically enclosed an interior courtyard. And the design was done, many months ago, but during the whole COVID, he gave us a call and said, hang on, we have to re-envision this thing. How can I get 3 classrooms out there? So people are starting to ask the question. So it went from, kind of a fun outdoor courtyard that was going to be, some play area for the kids, but now it became a little bit more structured, providing that kind of flexibility. So I think people are asking the question differently. And certainly as design professionals, we're asking the questions differently, because if there's an opportunity to provide some outdoor learning environments, which have always been out there, but it's been a financial constraint. I mean, can you afford to do the outdoor classroom if you can't really afford the interior classrooms? But I think that's taking an added focus, and I think it's going to look very, very differently as we move forward.
So Steve, is the firm that you work for, is it also providing sort of consulting services? You talk about all the various different steps that a school district can take, but if they're sort of like in the dark on that and not really sure what to do, is your firm stepping in to provide that assistance?
Actually, yes. We're very fortunate. We have a size and scale that we're big enough to devote some thought, knowledge, leadership to this particular topic. And to be honest, our firm has been approaching resiliency for a number of years, whether it be through sustainability, whether it be through LEED type projects, whether it be through the well building standard, whether it be through safety and security. This is just one more part and parcel in terms of what we're doing. And we spent a lot of time and resources the last couple of months, kind of getting together our subject matter experts and reaching out with our engineering partners and many of our clients and asking those very questions, and actually developing a series of white papers and such to help provide some guidance to a lot of districts. Carl's in a great position where he's got a very, he has a staff, and he has a very responsive board that can appreciate what's going on. There's a lot of school districts out there. And if you think about, Missouri's got 280 school districts or something. The vast majority of them are smaller and rural and really don't have the staff or expertise to develop this kind of stuff. So yes, we certainly have reached out to many, and we've had an opportunity to share some of the best practices that we've learned over the last couple of months. And we do see a lot of folks asking those kinds of questions.
I would like to ask, are any of your clients actually utilizing air quality tests, especially in the confined areas, the restrooms of their buildings, all smaller spaces especially, but what testing services are available for them to be able to get a read on the viral content of those spaces so that they can make an educated plan?
That is an excellent question. And I'll tell you, I'll give you my 2 cents, and then I'm sure Carl's got a thought on it as well. But school districts typically have something called a HARO plan, which is an asbestos environmental plan in place. So generally they have a relationship with an industrial hygienist who can come out and do some of that air quality sampling. I have not seen districts to date go out and specifically check for viral loads. They check for mold, they check for all manner of other things, but again, kids have only been in the classroom a couple short weeks. I'm not aware of anyone who's physically done that kind of testing at this point. Carl, I'd be curious to see if you or any of your the folks you work with have done that yet.
That testing has not taken place with anyone that I'm affiliated with or have had conversations with. How we've been approaching it from a ventilation standpoint, obviously as it relates to our restrooms, they are all outfitted with exhaust fans. So we've just ensured that those are working adequately to provide, to draw out all the air out of those spaces as it relates to, exhausting those restroom areas. As it relates to our educational spaces, really the focus is looking at our control systems on our heating and cooling to make sure that we're getting enough refresh air so that we're cycling our air, through our spaces. And then we're looking obviously at our filters as well. So for instance, we've upgraded our filters where possible. Obviously there are limitations and restrictions on many systems as to, how far you can go with your MERV ratings and how much you can upgrade without causing problems. So, and that's how myself and some of my counterparts at other districts have been addressing this one. But in terms of a comprehensive air quality test, I don't know of anybody that has done that yet.
Without that, it seems to me it's hard to really measure and assess the risk factor that each individual who goes in and uses that space is encountering. Personally, as an older person, I just don't go to public restrooms, but I'm at liberty to make that determination. Students, teachers, staff, many times employees of various kinds don't have that. They don't have that, option. Yeah, I understand. Then you got to deal with budgets, and it's probably kind of pricey to do that testing.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of districts partner with local hospitals or healthcare groups to kind of manage that whole COVID reporting process. And again, I'm not an expert on that, but I know that they are dealing with some healthcare professionals that are at least monitoring those students who do have to become quarantined, who may be subject to testing and things like that. Eventually, that information gets to the county health department and it gets reported. But Linda, you raise a great question. I'm not sure that we're to the point where you can walk into a building and they're going to tell you what the viral load is going to be in real time.
All right. Well, I'm gonna wrap us up here if that's okay, because we're past our 10:30 mark. But I just wanted to thank Steve again for being here and being our guest and talking about this really important topic. And thanks everyone who joined us this morning. We really appreciate it. We've been doing these coffee breaks about every other week. So we do have another one coming up on the 25th. I'm looking for my notes to remind myself what the topic is, but our guest is Richard Graves, who is the architect at the University of Minnesota. And he used to actually be employed with USGBC and also with the International Living Futures Institute, which is the parent of the Living Building Challenge. So we're excited to have him join us. He was supposed to be a speaker earlier this year in person, but we're going to have to take a break from that. So we also have a couple of deadlines coming up. On Monday is our deadline for our call for proposals for 2021 education calendar year. So we're starting to plan that out. Will likely be mostly virtual for next year. We also have a deadline for our Green Shadow registration for the fall, which is a kind of one-day mentor pairing. And then I just will also mention, although everyone probably knows this already, we are still recruiting for our Green Schools Quest. So even though we're not going to do it the same way we normally have with a full year project, where we still want to be supportive to schools and their sustainability efforts. So we're issuing monthly challenges and backing a little bit off of the competition aspect of the quest, but we actually have a webinar scheduled the 23rd of this month that will overview all the different monthly challenges and what we're working on. So just put those out there, and thanks again everybody for joining, and have a great rest of the day and a good weekend.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very interesting.